Hey everybody, it's Nick from Android Headlines, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Xiaomi Mi 5 to see how well this phone has held up over the last 3 months since its release. So part of the reason we wanted to wait so long in this initial review was because Xiaomi seems to have had a little more difficult time getting a stable global ROM released for the Mi 5 over their other devices. Whatever the reason for this is, the Mi 5 didn't receive a stable global ROM until late May, but we've at least been able to use the phone on a Chinese ROM since we got it in mid-March. Xiaomi's Mi 5 is everything you would expect from one of the largest OEMs in the world, especially given Xiaomi's pedigree. For around $330, you're getting specs that often cost double what you'll find here. On the front is a 5.15-inch 1080p display, while a Snapdragon 820 runs the show underneath. You'll also find 3 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of internal storage, and a 3000 mAh battery inside that non-removable back as well. If you've ever seen a Mi Note in person, you'll likely be very familiar with the design language here. The Mi 5 features the same flat glass back with curved edges as the Mi Note, but the size is definitely going to fit most hands quite a bit better than that phone. One thing you'll likely notice right off the bat is not only just how thin this thing is, but the fact that it doesn't feature a camera hump either, something that's incredibly surprising given the recent phone designs, but it's really just a little too light for its own good. At 129 grams, this thing weighs about 30 grams less than your average metal and glass phone, and that ends up really just making it feel a tad cheaper than other phones with a similar build. That doesn't mean it's made of cheap materials though, and in fact, this phone has held up better than any other flagship we've reviewed in months. While plenty of other phones have had scratches and scuffs on their glass surfaces, I have yet to see any scratches or scuffs appear at all on this entirely glass body, and that includes the front and back obviously, even though it's fallen off plenty of surfaces along the way. And of course, that leads me to the only other issue with the build too. All glass means no friction anywhere, and this thing is absolutely going to be dropped at some point because of it. Place it on a table or other surface with even the slightest angle to it, and you'll come back later to find that the phone has slid its way onto the floor. This problem also exists in the hand, where even relatively low humidity will make this one slippery as a bar of soap. You definitely want to get a case of this one, you won't regret it, even if it does unfortunately hide the beauty of the build. A rather interesting and unique choice Xiaomi made with the Mi 5 is its home button. All of Xiaomi's phones up to this point have featured 3 capacitive buttons below the screen, but the Mi 5 modifies that home button just a bit with some amazing results. This tiny home button has a fingerprint scanner built right in as you might expect nowadays, and it's a clicky physical button, but on top of that it's also a capacitive touch button for those of us, like myself, that hate pressing down on physical buttons. This brings the best of both worlds, and as expected in MIUI, you can customize the actions of these buttons to some extent too. Even though it's a small scanner, the fingerprint reader here is mostly excellent. Just make sure you don't get your hands wet or dirty, as the low surface area seems to hinder it from working at peak performance in these types of scenarios. There is only 3G available here in the US, no LTE on either T-Mobile or AT&T, at least in the Orlando area. That may be different depending on your carrier and spectrum, but worldwide you're probably going to have better luck with LTE coverage. Battery life has been great, but the background restrictions by default are a little too aggressive. Thankfully you can turn these off, but not all users are going to realize this and will likely end up missing notifications or emails because of it. I know I definitely did in the first couple of weeks before I even realized this was a setting. Quick Charge 3.0 is available here too for those that are running low on battery life, and will give you a 60 to 80% charge in about a half an hour, which is fantastic. Multitasking is much better than previous Xiaomi phones thanks to that new, better interface that looks identical to iOS 7's design, but of course works much better than the old icon-based design that was pretty terrible. VR is out on this one though because of the persistence rate of the screen. Things are just a little too blurry when moving around, and it's going to make many people sick. Sound quality is great on headphones, although it's not going to hold up so well on a better sound system. All of the sound enhancements here are designed specifically for headphones, and that stock output really just isn't all that great of quality. On the software front, MIUI 7 is here, and it's running atop Android 6.0 Marshmallow. That's pretty surprising given this is a huge back-end OS update, yet the front end is exactly the same as MIUI 7 running on Android 5.1 Lollipop. There's basically the same features as other models too, effectively, with just a few extras thrown in here and there depending on the hardware differences between this phone and whatever other Xiaomi model that you're comparing it with. As usual, MIUI has plenty of nice little nuances, things like the torch turning off when waking the screen back up from it being off, as well as other services like Mi Cloud, which is going to offer you plenty of syncing features and even cloud messaging as well that Google seems to somehow keep forgetting about. MIUI continues to improve considerably, but there are still a few annoyance areas like the lack of expandable notifications in most cases, a volume control panel that only controls one volume set at a time, A stock launcher that is iOS levels of terrible, and of course while you can change out the launcher, the default icons for all the Xiaomi apps are super ugly and look like they came off of Ice Cream Sandwich. That permissions manager tends to screw up sometimes too, and I had plenty of apps like Google Messenger and Tutu and GroupMe flat out not work because they couldn't request the needed permissions, and even going into the permissions manager didn't present me with the right permissions. MMS really didn't work all that right either in the stock messenger, as there seems to be no threaded view. Even using other texting apps would sometimes result in double text from the same person or other oddities. There's just a lot of weird software issues here that I found, and I really hope they clean this stuff up in MIUI 8. Thankfully though, the camera is excellent, it's super fast, it's really easy to use software, there's dedicated shutter and video record buttons which are fantastic to have, there's plenty of good mode choices, and of course that quality of the picture is the best part. Detail level is astounding on that 16 megapixel sensor, and there's no heavy denoise or sharpening filters here, even with those extremely fast capture speeds. Dynamic range is excellent, and auto HDR works incredibly well when needed. Even low light shots are excellent and generally looked as good as the best in most of these situations. That front-facing camera features large 2-micron pixels, so even though it's only 4 megapixels, it actually looks way better than most front-facing cameras. Onto that video mode, this one's pretty good, but that 4-axis OIS in there doesn't quite work as well as I expected. It definitely does a better job than a phone that doesn't have any optical image stabilization, for sure, but it's not quite as good as something like a Galaxy S7, HTC 10, or any of the other flagships that we reviewed this year. At least it is stabilized 4K video though, and generally looks excellent in most scenarios, so there's really not going to be a whole lot of complaining here. It's just not quite as good as some of those other models. Overall, this is a pretty excellent phone. I would say Xiaomi really knocked it out of the park this time, although some of those lingering software issues still get on my nerves. Xiaomi seems to show the biggest improvement with every handset, and this is definitely no exception. Over the past 3 months using this phone on and off, I did find myself getting more annoyed with the changes that MIUI brings over stock Android though. So for users who love the stock Android experience, you're going to want to stay away from this one because it's probably going to drive you crazy. There's plenty of other phones that are similarly spec'd and similarly priced that you can choose from that feature a more stock experience, and you're likely going to have a better time with those. Otherwise, users who are okay with a more iOS-like experience will likely be super happy here, especially if you use Xiaomi's services. We hope you enjoyed that video and will subscribe if you did. Be sure to check out all our other content here as well as on the site. Check us out on Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're at, we're at. Thanks for watching, and until next time.